Every once in a while, it's good for us to take a moment to be reminded of why we actually do what we do. And I was thinking about this week, if you've been new to our church, and even the past 9 months or so, you could easily think that I have some incredible fascination with the book of Luke. I mean, almost every Sunday, I'm like, hey, open up to the Gospel of Luke. And you could be easily forgiven for thinking that Luke is my favorite book of the Bible. And truthfully, it's one of my 66 favorite books of the Bible. But yeah, that's like a theology nerd joke right there. So here's the deal. We're not just preaching for my favorite book. Part of what we do, and maybe this will make sense, if you leave any of us as individuals, if you leave us to our own devices, there are certain things that we just naturally are drawn to and that we naturally appreciate. And maybe think of this in terms of food. If it was just you, you don't have to worry about family or anything like that. If it was just you, it could be easily possible to get about 5 or 6 meals that you really like and make an entire diet out of those 5 or 6 meals, right? Like, it's just, hey, I like this food, and because it's just me, I'm just going to eat these foods. And for some of us, we get this narrowed down to like 1 or 2 meals, right? The same thing is true when it comes to church and when it comes to the Bible. We all have different personalities, and there's parts of this for us that we might be more drawn to a certain genre of the Scripture. And as a pastor, I'm no different. As a pastor, there are parts of the Bible and there are parts of the Jesus story that I absolutely love and resonate with a little more than others. And so if you just leave me to my own devices, we're going to have the same, half a dozen sermons over and over and over and over again. But after a while, they get kind of boring, right? So what we do is, part of the reason that we just take our time and work through books is because it completely removes my ability to pick what we're preaching on. You just go, okay, God, what's the next portion? What we do here is we simply take a book of the Bible. In this case, we've been in Luke now for months, and we just work through it passage by passage by passage. Now, a couple of things are wonderful about that. One is you don't have to hear the same 6 sermons over and over and over again. But another thing that's really helpful with that is it helps us to develop and understand the story differently. I mean, how many of you have watched the series The Chosen, right? And if you watch one episode of that, you kind of go, oh, okay, it's pretty good. But then when you watch the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and you start watching them, and some of you have watched every single episode of The Chosen, and you anxiously wait for the next one, right? Because when you do that, you start to see these characters come alive in different ways, right? Because as you do, you go, oh, there's Matthew, and you begin to see this character development of Matthew, and it really adds like depth and life to it. And part of what's wonderful about being able to go through Luke passage by passage by passage, the same thing happens. We watch Jesus, we see the story that Luke is writing unfold differently, and we begin to pay attention to certain themes that Luke is writing on. And as we do that, we get this wonderful, beautiful picture of who Jesus is. So if you have your Bibles, I'd like to invite you to open up to Luke. Not because it's the only book I know, but because what we do is passage by passage through this incredible book. Luke, we're going to finish up today the 7th chapter. We're going to start in Luke chapter 7, verse 36. If you have your Bibles, Luke chapter 7, verse 36. You're welcome to pull out that phone, that flat screen if you want to, and follow along on the Bible app. We don't mind. Or if you have your paper Bible like I do, or if you don't have those, you want to just follow along on the screen behind me, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Luke chapter 7, we're going to start at verse 36. Here's what Luke writes. Now, one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him. So he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and she stood behind him at his feet weeping. And she began to wet his feet with her tears, and then she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured perfume on them. We're going to stop for just a minute here to try to get some context on this one, because this just seems really, really odd to us. What's happening here is an incredible picture of, incredible snapshot into life in the first century. You see, in those days, this Pharisee has come to Jesus, and at this point we don't have a name. We'll find out later his name is Simon, but we don't have a name. This Pharisee has come to Jesus, and the verbiage that Luke uses means he asked, and he asked, and he asked, and he asked. He kept asking over and over and over again. He wanted Jesus to come to dinner with him. This is not some like a quick one-time thing. This is a thing where over and over he's begging Jesus, I want you to come and have dinner with me. And in what he sets up is going to be a traditional dinner in the sense that they're all reclining at the table. They aren't sitting. It's not like at your dining room table or at your house. At least I don't think so. You see, for most of us, we have a table and we have a chair and we sit on the chair and we pull ourselves up to the table, right? And you're kind of in this position as you eat your steak or whatever you're going to eat. Right? That's not how this was. This is different. This is more of a Roman influence thing. So what's going to happen, if you get it in your mind's eye, there's a kind of an open courtyard, something like that, in the middle of the home. And then you have this table, a very, very low table. And on three sides of that table, you'd have like cushions or that kind of thing. And the guests who were invited are actually stretched out. They're laying down with their head toward the table and their feet far away from the table. And they'd be laying kind of on their left side a little bit, so they'd be eating with their right hand and propping themselves up with these cushions on their left arm. And they'd all be there around the table. Now, because this is a situation where it's kind of an open courtyard thing, the people who aren't invited to the dinner, like the other townspeople, might be strolling down the street, or they might be following Jesus, and they might see that Jesus has gone into Simon's home. And they are welcome to come in and watch. I don't know if you have anyone like watch you eat dinner, right? But this is what's happening. They're all kind of like, there's probably 9 to 12 people around the table who are invited to be a part of it, and they're talking, and then anyone else who wants to show up can show up and just listen. And they can hear. It's kind of like the people at the dinner are like the dinner show. And everybody else can watch and see and know what's going on. What happens in this instance is it's an opportunity for Jesus to keep teaching because other people who are like non-guests can hear what Jesus is saying. And Simon gets the advantage. For Simon, it's an opportunity for him to show everybody that Jesus has blessed me with his presence. Jesus is here with me. I got Jesus to come to dinner. It's kind of like a feather in his cap because in that day and that time, to eat dinner with somebody or to eat a meal with somebody was to give a sort of public connection. It was to acknowledge enemies didn't eat together. Rather, it was people who had some connection would eat together. And so for Simon, it's a chance for him to show off and go, look, Jesus is here with me. And everybody else gets to come and hear Jesus. So this isn't some sort of a private dinner gathering. This is a public thing. Which makes the rest of the passage really interesting, right? Because all of a sudden this lady shows up. And this woman shows up who Luke describes as someone who's lived a sinful life. She shows up. No one's upset that she shows up. Did you catch that? Oh, we haven't got there yet, have we? So we probably should keep reading, right? Here we go. Verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw this, sees this woman crying on Jesus' feet and wiping his feet with her hair and kissing his feet and pouring perfume on his feet, when he sees this, he says to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of a woman she is. She's a sinner. The nerve. And Jesus answered, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. And neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now, which of them do you suppose will love him more? And Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled. You have judged correctly, Jesus says. So again, let's go back to the picture in your mind, right? They're all around the table. They're eating. This woman comes in, and she begins to create a little bit of a scene. She cries, she's crying and wailing, but enough crying and wailing that there's enough moisture from her eyes, enough tears to actually wash Jesus' feet. And then she takes down her hair, which truthfully was very scandalous in that day. Women would keep their hair up, at least proper women would keep their hair up. To let their hair down in public was scandalous. It was almost an intimate act. And so as she pulls her hair down and she begins to dry Jesus' feet and then kiss his feet and pour perfume on his feet, it's gonna create a scene. And Simon looks and goes, "Oh, I knew it. That guy's a fake." Because if he really was who he said he was, if he really was a prophet, he would know. Wouldn't let the likes of her. Now, he didn't say it out loud, he just says it in his mind, right? Which is the really funny part of how Luke writes it, because Simon in his mind is saying if, and Jesus is sitting there going, "Dude, I can read your mind." Which is just a fun part of the story, right? And so Jesus looks at him and goes, "Hey, I have a question for you, Simon." And he asks him a question. "Hey, look, there's this guy, this money lender, who lent money to two people. One person, he lent 500 denarii, literally, essentially 2 years' wages, give or take a little bit. And then here's another person that he lent 50 denarii, again, give or take 2 months' wages." And so if you want to do the math on that for your life, if it helps you, that's fine. 2 years' wages versus 2 months' wages. And neither person could pay him back, so he just forgave it all. Now, which one do you think is more devoted? Which one do you think loves him more? Which one is more devoted? Which one is more devoted to that moneylender? And Simon goes, "Is this a trick question?" Now remember, everybody can hear him talk. So it's almost like Jesus is like just pitching him a softball, right? And Simon, if you can imagine for a second, Simon's going, "Oh, I think you asked me a hard question, Jesus. This one's easy. I think it's probably the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." Maybe there's a part of it that kind of looks like, "Dude, I thought you were smarter than this. You're asking me this question? If you don't know the answer to this one, we're in trouble." And Jesus says, "Oh, you've judged correctly." And Simon gets a bigger smile on his face because remember, part of the reason that he has this dinner is he wants people to think well of him. And so all of a sudden, Simon's got a huge smile on his face because he answered the question correctly. And then all of a sudden, as Jesus is wont to do, he simply turns the table really quick. He goes on, verse 44. He turned to the woman and said to Simon, I got to picture it. Jesus looks here, but is talking over here. Do you see her? "I came into your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet. But she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little." And then Jesus says to her, the first thing he said to her the entire time, "Your sins are forgiven." Or maybe a slightly more helpful, "Your sins have been forgiven." The other guests begin to say among themselves, the other people around the table, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" And Jesus says to this woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Almost like, this is going to get kind of dicey. You probably should get out of here before this gets dicey. And Luke cuts the story off. What Jesus is saying here to Simon is, look, there are basic common courtesies that you should have done. You should have washed my feet because that's a common courtesy. In that day, that time, with dusty roads and sandals at best, maybe bare feet at worst, you have feet that are going to be kind of gross. And He says, look, the basic common courtesy is you should have just washed my feet. The basic courtesy would have been to greet me with a kiss, a sign of respect. The basic courtesy would have been to offer me a greeting to make sure I was comfortable. Those are the basic courtesies. The basic courtesy were to be like anoint with oil, do something, because let's face it, all of us smell kind of bad. And having something to cover that up would have been helpful, and you didn't do any of that. But this woman has done all of that. And notice what Jesus says, her sins have been forgiven because she loved much. It's important to understand with the story that Jesus tells and the language that Jesus uses, we need to understand something. The reason that her sins are forgiven is not because of the tears or the hair or the perfume or the kisses. None of that. That is all a response to the forgiveness that has already taken place. Notice how Jesus tells the story. The language that he uses here is all past tense. In other words, what he's saying is forgiveness has already happened. Her life has already been changed. This is her response to it. In fact, the way the story sets up, it's actually this comparison between two people. This Pharisee named Simon and this woman who we do not know her name. Part of me would love to give her name because it makes the story easier to tell, but that's not the point of the story. In fact, it would almost be dishonoring to her to give her a name. Hopefully it'll be clear why in a little bit. Luke sets up through his storytelling this comparison between the two. This Pharisee named Simon, this unnamed but woman who lived a sinful life. He sets up a comparison between the two. And frankly, at first glance, we might say, well, you know something? We don't like that guy. Which would be fair because we know the end of the story, but I think if those two individuals were to walk in here today, if I may be so bold, I think we'd probably like him better. Let me tell you what I mean. Simon is a Pharisee, and for many of us who've grown up in church, Pharisee is a dirty word. I mean, maybe some of you were like me and you grew up in Sunday school and you're coloring pictures, and Pharisee is like one of those words, it's like equivalent to a 4-letter word, right? We cannot say that in church. Here's the thing with the Pharisees, though. Simon is a Pharisee. Like, his point wasn't that he wasn't trying to live his life in a way to be mean and condescending and be a jerk to everybody. That's not what the Pharisees were about. What the Pharisees were trying to do, and what they understood was this. When they looked at the Old Testament, they believed that if we as a community can follow the law, if we can do what God is calling us to and what God tells us to do, if we can do that well enough, then God will come and rescue us. And so when the Pharisees, when they act the way they do, and when they call out things in other people, in the best sense, what they're not trying to do is be jerks. What they're really trying to do is trying to say, hey, look, you're ruining it for everybody else. When you speed down the highway, you get God's gaze over this area where we're messing up, and there's extra policemen there. So if none of us speed, then the policeman won't have to come out and watch that stretch of road. Right? Or if all of us can just do a good job of following the law, then God will send someone to rescue us. And here on the other side is a woman who, quite frankly, apparently her reputation is such that everybody knows about her. We also know with Simon, not only is he trying hard, he also studies hard. This guy knows his Bible, the Old Testament. He knows it, quite frankly, better than any of us do. He probably had all or even very large chunks of it memorized. This dude sat around and debated it. I mean, how many of you on a Tuesday afternoon go, I want to debate Isaiah 4? Like, none of us are there, right? But that's Simon's hobby. I mean, this dude is like, he's a good guy. In fact, here's the thing with Simon is the kind of guy we know and we understand and we recognize and we can resonate with his motives. Because let's be honest, like how many of us would really love for people to know, just as we walk down the street, know that like Jesus approves of us? That's what Simon is doing with this meal. Simon wants everybody in town to know that Jesus and him are on good terms. If he had questions for Jesus, he could have come to Jesus at a different time and not a public way. That's what Nicodemus did. In John, Nicodemus comes at night and talks to Jesus. Simon is publicly having this meal, publicly invites Jesus, begs Jesus to be there because he wants people to know that he and Jesus have a connection. Let's face it, like, that's not a person that we would be upset with. If someone walked in with an I Love Jesus shirt, we'd kind of go, oh, cool, why don't you sit by me at church? As opposed to someone that everybody knows is not the kind of best person in the world. Like, let's be honest, we'd probably be more comfortable with Simon, right? And that's the thing that makes this passage so interesting. Is because in the story, Jesus defends the person that honestly we would kind of, I don't know. And Jesus calls out the person that we kind of like. There's a very clear difference between the two. I want to offer you this. As I read this story, it's almost like it somehow comes down to motive. Again, go back to that picture you had there in your mind. What's happening is that Simon wants people to know that he and Jesus have a connection. The woman doesn't care about that. Simon cares what people think. He obviously cares what people think because he has Jesus over to a public meal where everybody can come and hang out. Simon cares what people think. He wants people to know that he has a connection with Jesus. And this woman obviously doesn't. She just shows up and doesn't care what people think. And her whole thing is, this person, this Messiah, this Jesus has completely changed my life and I just want to be close to him. I don't care what anybody thinks, I just want to be close. See, the motivation matters. If I can pick for a little bit, maybe to help us understand. It's kind of like when we come to church, are we coming to church because we want people to see us and check it off the list and go, oh, I know that person's close to Jesus? Or do we come to church because we actually want to be close to Jesus? There's a difference, right? And I was thinking about this a little bit. It's almost as if like what Simon wants is Simon wants Jesus to rubber stamp all of his opinions. What Simon wants is Jesus to come along and just go, yes, Simon, you're amazing. So everybody sees it. And the woman couldn't care less. She's all about being transformed by Jesus. Do you see the difference? One person just wants this rubber stamp. Sign off, Jesus. Let people know I'm as awesome as I think I am. And the other person comes in and goes, you have transformed my whole life. I don't care what anyone thinks. I just want to be close to you. Let me try it this way. I realized this week, well, probably better said, I realized I was preparing for the sermon that looking back over my life, I have now reached the point in ministry where I've been in ministry long enough I can be retrospective, which made me feel amazing. I've been doing this long enough that I can look back on the good old days. No, they weren't really good old days. On the early days. And I remember like when I started in ministry, I started ministry, I was in Maryland and got in, I was the youth pastor and then became the associate pastor and became the executive pastor. And essentially like over 7 years, I was at that church. I just kept getting more and more stuff that I was running and I loved it and it was wonderful. And I was doing everything and I was doing everything from leading the youth group to like leading the finance committee meetings and the whole thing. And it was wonderful. And people started to know there was this guy named Brian at this church. And people in the district knew it, and I got invited to help with projects on the district and all these kind of things. And honestly, I was the wonder kid on the district. I was like the really special one, or one of the really special ones. I was this wonderful young pastor, and there was a point where I was asked to help set up events for like big name authors and things like that, and they would bring them in, and I was the behind the scenes guy helping to set that stuff up, and it was great, and the superintendent would come and ask me for help with this or that and all those kind of things. It was awesome, and I was like, it was almost like I was flying down the road in like my shiny new Corvette, just like loving life because I was the life of the party. And here's the problem. Outside, everything was great. But what I was really doing was I was over here saying, God, don't I do ministry great? You're lucky to have me. I'm awesome. Here's my opinion on all these things. Just stamp it for me. Because I got this figured out. And then all of a sudden, I had my Corvette into a brick wall moment. And I started to realize, and well, it didn't start to, I had to realize really fast, that all that stuff of just like, God, this is how you do ministry. I had it figured out. And I was going, God, this is how you do ministry. Man, you should make more in my mold because I'm awesome. If you made everyone like me, man, we'd have this world saved in no time. Come on, get on it. Because I just wanted God to rubber stamp all my opinions and all my great ideas. And if you just make more of them like me, because I got it figured out. And then I had to come to this moment of going, oh, I'm not as smart, bright, or wonderful as I think I am. And I had to have a moment of absolutely just being crushed. And going, God, I just need you to fix this thing. Because I am a mess. And in thinking about this morning, what I realized in my life, this is how it works for me, it may be different for you, is it's not about being Simon or being this woman. In my life, it's not about being one or the other. In my life, what I find is this. There's areas of my life where I am completely sold out. God, however you want to do this area of my life, that's awesome. And then there's other areas where I'll go, no, God, I'm good on this. I have this one figured out. I just need you to stamp this thing because I got it figured out. When it comes to eternity, I'm really good at going, God, I got nothing on that. I'll just do it your way. When it comes to eternity, I'm really good about that. I'm really good with God, whatever you want me to do, right? However you want to do eternity, that one's you. But then, even this week, as I was final touches on this sermon this morning, I'm looking at this, and God all of a sudden starts pointing out a couple areas in my life. And he's like, Brian, hang on, Brian. There's this area of your life that you think you have it figured out. And you just want me to rubber stamp that, but I won't do it. Which, as a side note, is really uncomfortable for a pastor. Do you know that? It's really uncomfortable. All of a sudden, you're like, yeah, but geez, I got this figured out. And he goes, no. You haven't asked or listened to my opinion on that issue at all. You formed an opinion, and you want me to rubber stamp it, and I will not do it. And I went, oh. Well, that's kind of stinky. And I had to go, okay, God, I get it. Let me come over here. How do you want me to deal with that? And I'm curious if that's not just me, but maybe if there's some of that some of you feel as well. There's areas of life like eternity or like, I don't know, like music. Well, God, look, I understand all the songs we sing aren't my thing, but, I understand that we're trying to give music for the whole church, and okay, that's fine. Okay, whatever way you want to do it. Okay. And I'm curious if there's some things where we're like, we've completely let Jesus transform us on certain things, and we're okay, God, I get it. But I'm wondering if there's other areas for some of us where we may actually just be asking Jesus to rubber stamp what we've already decided. I don't know. Maybe things like how we spend our time. God, I really haven't prayed about it, but to me, as I look at my calendar, this just seems like the best use of my time. Can you stamp that for me? Can you bless that for me? Maybe the way we spend our money. God, I know I haven't talked to you about it, I haven't considered what you asked me to do, but here's what I'm going to do with my money. I just want you to stamp this for me. Maybe it's our marriage, the way that we parent. Maybe it's even, I don't know, our sexuality. Maybe it's the kind of employee we are. God, look, I know I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to shortcut these 18 things. Just stamp that and bless it for me. I don't know. Maybe it's the way that we interact with our neighbors, or I don't know, there's 5,000 things it could be. But I think in general, here's what I've discovered. Most of us are not completely in our entire life one side or the other. But I believe for a lot of us, if we're willing to pay attention to where God's putting his thumb, there may be an area, maybe two, where God has his thumb. He's going, you know something? You are asking me to rubber stamp this. And you've been asking me to rubber stamp this for a year, or 2 years, or 5 years, or 5 minutes, I don't know. But you've been asking me to rubber stamp this, and I simply will not do it. I will not bless what you won't let me touch. And then we go through life and we wonder, why is it that some people are just, they're in love with Jesus and they're crying and they just want to be close to Jesus, and for me it just seems like Jesus isn't blessing what I wanted to bless. Could it possibly be because we're asking Jesus to bless what we won't let him touch? I think the question for us this morning, my friends, is simply this. Do we want to be close to Jesus and transformed by Jesus, or do we just want Jesus, are we just asking Jesus to rubber stamp stuff? If I can be even more bold, I might say it like this. What is the area of your life that you are simply asking Jesus to rubber stamp? What's that area that you're like, you know, I don't need Jesus' opinion on this because I have it figured out. And Jesus, I just need you to John Hancock that thing. And for those of you who aren't sure what that area is, probably the one you first thought of when I asked the question. You know, in a moment we're gonna sing a song together in just a moment, but as we get ready to sing, I just want to invite us to think about these two individuals. Simon was pretty sure he had it figured out. All he wanted Jesus to do was to rubber stamp it. And his life just went on the same way it always went on. But this woman comes to Jesus and she says, you have completely changed me. And I don't care what anybody else thinks. I just want to be close. I just want to be near you. And as we sing, I'm curious for some of us if we just might not need that moment. I'm curious for some of us if we might not need that moment of just being able to say, I don't care. I just want to be close to Jesus. And in all honesty, I just need to let go of this area of my life and say, I'm done trying to rubber stamp this, Jesus. I just want you to change me. So I invite you, if you would, to stand. And in a moment, we're going to sing. We're going to pray, and then we're going to sing. But I just want to invite you, as we say a closing word of prayer, and maybe as we sing, if God's talking to you about something, can I just invite you to come up and to bow a knee? To say, God, I don't care what any of those things. I don't care what it looks like. I don't care. I just want to be close to you. Because I've been asking you to bless this area of my life for long enough. And I realize that what I'm doing is simply asking you to bless what I won't let you touch. And God, I'm done with that. I just want to be near you and be changed by you.